9-man panel. Our motion as an able slide. A lottocracy is a system of governance in which representatives are selected randomly from the pool of individual citizens instead of being chosen through election. The selection is done by lottery, designed to produce a body that reflects the population. For example, in the Nigerian autocracy, members of the National Assembly could be chosen by random draw from the National Voter Registry, ensuring representation across regions, genders, and age groups. Motion is this House will replace Nigeria's electoral system with a autocracy. We know the rules. 1 minute is your protected time. After 1 minute, you can ask and take your eyes. At 6 minutes, your protected time, and 7 minutes, time up. You have 15 seconds to wrap up. Please let's make this debate engaging and let's have a great debate. All right. And now I'd like to call the Prime Minister to open the case of the government side. Here, here.
Okay. So before I start, I just want to say that I'm happy to be here. Just dedicatory, huh? Okay, dedicatory speeches. I'm happy to be here. I want to thank my coach, who has also been my partner for the entirety of this tournament. I've not been. He has been, without him, I don't think I'll be able to get here. I want to thank my union, Obafemi Awolowo University Literary and Debating Society. We just started out, and I know that greater heights for us. We've done well. And also, regards to the school, especially to the dean, student affairs, if he's seeing this, because it seems we have to clash recently. Anyways, my speech would begin in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, we think that the biggest problem in status quo in Nigeria as well, because this debate is about Nigeria, is the fact that we do not have representation across all groups that are, that exist in Nigeria. Women, youth, even ethnic groups and all of those kind of things, right? For a country that is very diverse in terms of ethnicities, in terms of age and all of those kind of things, we think that at the central body, especially since we utilize like a federal system where power is centralized at the top and all of those kind of things, we think that the fact that we do not have that representation actually allows for the marginalization and oppression of several groups within Nigeria. So what it looks like is that in the National Assembly, you do not have like enough women symmetric to men. So you have less women and then you have like more men. And this is why, for example, the issue of like Natasha Akpoti and all of those things was able to be rife in the National Assembly, because to a very large extent, there was no like strong support for women within that particular structure of leadership. We think that to a very large extent, the fact that we do not have symmetric representation in our electoral system is a problem that we need to solve, right? Because we think that that problem would also ensure that many like voices that are in Nigeria would have their voices at the helm of leadership, would be able to contribute. So their own realities, their own identities will be part of the policy making situation or policy making like decisions that group. So what it looks like is that if you have a symmetric number of women, they are able to say, this is the things that matter the most to us, right? And how can we ensure that these things are made into policies that would benefit us and benefit the people? We think that altogether, when that symmetric system exists, it allows for like better progress or better development of Nigeria as we see it today. What would our world look like? We think that in our world, one primary thing is clear. Things like political parties would not exist, right? So people don't necessarily need to like ride on, you know, like the party structure and all of those things. The problem with party structure in status quo is because parties have now been hijacked by people who have capacity, people who have money. They can utilize the standard of party and do whatever they want with it. It looks like what is happening currently with the ADC, where the person who is the flag bearer of the ADC have been tossed aside, and then you now have people that just moved from different parties because they have the capacity and they think that they want to change the country. They take over and just sideline those kind of people. We think that in this world where randomness exists, randomness in how you choose your leaders and all of those kind of things, we think that this structure would not exist. But we also think that in this structure, and this is very important, there would exist a body that would manage the process, right? That body would, it's just like INEC, right? That body would also, and in our world, that body would be symmetric. So what it means is that it will be drawn from every part or region of Nigeria. It would also be representative of like every ethnic group. It will be representative of every different minorities, majorities, and so up in Nigeria. This body would also ensure that during the time of like this random selection process for leadership, the thing is conducted like freely and fairly. We think that that would also happen simply because these bodies, number one, symmetric, right? So they have like an idea, all of them want everybody like people to get there. But secondly, since the process is like agenda of a region, of those particular kind of things, it is whoever like wins from the lottery draw that gets to power. We think that that is very beneficial for the system of our nation as we have it today. But also, we think that tenure of offices would also exist. This is just fact, this is just logical. So it means that for just the same way we have it maybe 4 years in Nigeria and all those things will exist. I'll take you in a bit. Right? Now, basically, what we are defending here on our side of the world is the fact that we want representation. We think that representation is not symmetric. So it means that if we pick like, and this is the way the thing will go. So if we pick like a 50 males, or the idea would be that when we pick like 50 males from like the draw or what of those kind of things, we also like want to target ensuring that we also have like 50 females like from the draw, all of those kind of things. So it means that if you are coming from like the regions or you are submitting your name and all of those kind of things, the body would ensure that you have that symmetric advantage is gotten from this thing. What the implication of our word is this: one, that you might have, and I think this might be the biggest problem of like maybe from opposition or some of the problems that we raise. One, you might have the idea that, oh, people who are not like, who do not have capacity to lead, who do not have like capacity to ensure that leadership progresses well, would occupy power and all those kind of things. We think on this argument that firstly, leadership cannot exist in isolation. So if you have like symmetric representation, you are going to have, if you have young people, you also have old people, people who have capacity, people who have experience. All of this leadership pool exists at the top. What happens is that if there is an idea or a policy that is about to be created, there are people who can check and balance like those policies based on what happens, right? To a very large extent, we think that even if such things happen, those things will not be like will not be bad enough like to hurt like the way the country will progress and all of those kind of things. But secondly, we think that things like impeachment can also occur. So if you are bad as a leader, if we think that you are not good, we can effectively impeach you and ensure the election or the selection of somebody who is better. And let me take your POI before I continue. Okay, good. See, the thing is this: corruption like is symmetric in both worlds. That's true. Corruption will also exist in your world as corruption will exist in ours. But this is the thing, right? If you look at the problem of Nigeria, at least for the past like 10, 20 years, you realize that there have been a recycling of the same faces, the recycling of the same people, the recycling of the same structures. This is because these guys have already gotten the capacity to continually buy their way through the electoral system and ensure that they continue to occupy the same position. This is why someone like Atiku can continue to contest for elections and all of these kinds of things, because he has the capacity and he can move from one party to the other and people will just allow him to continue. We think that when that hijack exists because of the system that we currently practice in status quo. In our world, that hijack does not exist because you do not know necessarily who is going to occupy this position or who can occupy it. It can literally be anybody, and after the tenure of office is over, it can be another person, God knows what. Our world is more representative, right? Because now you are able to draw a pool of a large number of people, different people across different regions. You're able to draw different minorities and all of those things coming into like the leadership positions. It means that all the things that affect each group within Nigeria, right? All of those issues that affect them will be properly represented at the top. But secondly, we think that political conflict will reduce in terms of power. This power struggle that exists between leadership that also translates into the rousing of ethnic tensions and conflict. All of these things will reduce simply because of the fact that it is random. You don't know who's occupying those things. You don't need to prioritize your tribe or your people above anybody. We are proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your speech. Now invite the leader of the future of the Prime Minister. Yeah.
Okay. Okay then. Before I start my speech, my name is Justice Tinka, and I'm not a debater. I was not supposed to be a debater. And to that regard, I want to say shout out to Scott, who kept on interrupting my rarely occasional afternoon sleep during rehearsals, forcing me to debate and to participate, also actually listening. For those of you guys who are just starting debates or you're not really good at debate, I'm going to share a very, very important secret with you guys. The secret to being a good debater, like a very good debater, is to have a coach like mascot, or better still, have mascot as your coach. Shout out to FUTO, the family that I didn't think I need, but now that I really, really love. Shout out to Kenneth, the partner that doesn't stress me so much. I think that's a very, very good thing to have in terms of partners. And finally, shout out to myself for not giving up when I should. Okay then. I'm going to be starting my speech very soon. I'm going to prioritize closing government. I'm going to try and take both of you guys though. But if I don't, Kenneth is going to handle that. I'll be starting then in 3, 2, 1. There's a problem with what you get from the Prime Minister, and that is a couple of things. Firstly, it tells you that the problem in Nigeria is a lack of representation. It doesn't understand that this lack of representation is a problem of corruption. It means that these are systems or individuals who necessarily don't want us to grow. So we don't think it's because the democracy itself is failing, it's because the people within democracy are bad and are leading to corruption. I'm going to explain why that is very important in the world that they decide to live in. The second thing it talks about is that why that there's a need for us to not have political parties. I'm going to be doing a couple of things before I get to my argumentation on why it's important that we have political parties and politicians in Nigeria. Most policies, or the majority of policies that require us to be passing, require public participation. It then means that for you to have the public to participate, to actually accrue, that means when the state says don't do this, the reason they're not going to do this is because they know that they have a certain level of engagement or participation in that particular policy. Now, political parties exist to collectivize political identity. It means that it gives people the space for them to actually perform or to actually push for their own policies within the space of government. We think that in a world where you take away this particular action, it means you deprive people of the ability to actually influence what state does and how state does this particular thing. I think it's very intuitive to understand why that's necessarily very bad. Next thing they say, that there's going to be a body to manage this process. Exactly the same problem with the first argumentation. That they don't prove to us how this body is going to not be corrupt. The INEC is named independent, yet we both know how the case happens with them. We think that's it. Now let's get to the proper argumentation. I'm going to prove in a couple of things within this debate. Firstly, I'm going to prove now what it looks like when you decide to replace. This is a couple of things. Number one, you're going to scrap the INEC constitution. Secondly, you're going to redefine the system of government that we currently have. And thirdly, and most importantly, you're going to force people who have been chosen to actually represent the country, or to the extent that you decide you're not going to force them, because opening government does not tell us what they're going to do when you are picked. But saying you're not going to force them, it means you're going to keep recycling. It means if you pick justice, and justice says, I don't want to be the governor, you have to pick somebody else, and this keeps on going. I'm going to show why this is a cycle that continues indefinitely within the status quo of Nigeria. So firstly, let's talk about the context of Nigeria. A couple of things that are problematic with our Nigeria, with our country. First is corruption. Basically, every system of government, every system of, like, once you have a collective group of people, you're going to have corruption. It means it's a systemic problem that's not just to be fixed. It's not just a government thing and that's something. The second thing is the lack of education that exists in Nigeria. This appears in many ways. It means, number one, people don't go to school necessarily. It means they're largely illiterate. Or secondly, the amount of knowledge that they get is largely very specific. I am not a political science person. It means that my field within science is going to exist. It means even if you pick me and I decide to go, I'm going to be a very bad representative to discuss the issues that affect my country. We think in general at school, people or individuals who exist within spaces don't know anything about those spaces. I don't know anything about my hometown. I don't know anything about the place I'm living. We think that's a general consensus that everybody shares. This becomes very problematic when you pick these individuals as your representatives. The third thing on the context of Nigeria, and that is to say that Nigeria is a third world country. I'm going to explain, like my partner is going to explain why this is very important, because then when you decide to implement this particular system of government, you affect Nigeria's ability to actually interact with other states of government or to other states in terms of international relations. Let's get to the first thing, proving why this is necessarily very bad. A couple of things happen when you decide to replace these guys. Number one, you're going to create a certain level of chaos. Because notice on their side, they don't mechanize how this replacement is not going to create a certain level of vacuum within the structure. It then means that you're going to scrap what we have now and you're going to replace it. And for you to do that, it means you have to convince people this is a very valid thing to do. Even if we concede to their side that yes, you're going to get this particular kind of action, it then means what you do is that you open up the opportunities for the corruption that I talked about. Remember, the system of government that we have now, which is democracy, is tried and true. It means that this system of government that we're trying to do now is going to be something that's going to have to be tried again. And the problem with this is that when we try the system of government within a corruption, like within a corruption fair, you're going to most likely end up with a corrupt system of government. The second thing is that lottocracy does not hold the capacity to produce the same best outcomes consistently. Democracy works because we know, the underlying principle is that it's impossible for one person, which is a bad leader, to lobby the majority of people within a state to actually vote for them. In their side of the world, that means in our side of the world, there's a chance of us getting someone like Abraham Lincoln as our president. In that side of the world, that's never going to happen because randomness is predicated on the fact that the same person cannot be chosen twice, or that to the extent that you're always going, like, there's no condition to the extent you're going to choose people. Because notice from the info slide, you're going to push people from the national voters legacy. The guys that are on this national voters legacy are all of us. It means that tomorrow I could become your president. So please vote opening opposition. So yeah, this necessarily means that the conditions that are going to exist for this payment to even exist, to be good or to be viable to the context of Nigeria, is something that's largely very lacking to the extent that Prime Minister does not mechanize how this is going to happen. The second thing I'm going to be proving to you is that a fair process, because that's the biggest case you get from them, that this is going to be fair. We don't think that the system of government exists to be fair, they exist to be just. That's what makes democracy very wonderful. Because to the extent whereby, like, and when I'm talking about justice, it's not justice to the politicians, it's justice to the people. I'm going to explain why it's very important. The reason why this can't lead to a very, very fair process, because to the extent that you randomize systems of government, this means that these individuals are going to be picking or deciding decisions that affect people like in status quo. It means that you force these citizens to be subject to the whims of the people who they did not necessarily choose. We think that yes, randomness is fair. We can concede to that. But the randomness to the extent that it becomes the condition by which democracy or by which leaders are chosen is something that actually then becomes unjust. We think that the principle within statement that is defined to be the principle within statement that it's defined to be just. That is the basic underlying principle by which states exist and by which nations particularly function. Yeah, closing government. Yeah, there's a certain problem with that now. If you submit your name and indicate interest, it's the same problem that exists within status with that. I can submit my name 20 times. Or to the extent, I can get a couple of people submit my name 20 times. It means that even if you decide, okay, then, to the extent, like this also boils down to the context that I gave you. In terms of, like, people in Nigeria necessarily don't know a lot of things about Nigeria enough to lead. That is why we have the cycling of leaders that Prime Minister talks to you about. It means in their world, you're most likely going to get only one person that is going to submit their name. Or even to the extent that you get people that are going to submit their name, it becomes very easy for Tinubu to come and oppress me and say, Justice, if you submit your name, I'm going to snap your neck. We think that's things that happen within that side of the world that necessarily don't get when you have a democratic system. The last thing I'm going to be talking to you about is what constitutes a good representation and why it's bad. Nigeria, you're never going to get to on that side of the world. A couple of things. Firstly, on acceptance. It means that for something to be a good representation, the individuals they are presenting have to consent that they want you to represent them. We think that to the extent that they are going to consent to lottocracy, it's not the same extent that they consent to the leaders. They can consent to the process, but they don't consent to leaders. We think that's actually very bad. Secondly, on good qualities. It means that you have to have a good, a bold, a smart, a disciplined, and accountable person. We think that is our qualities that are largely very, very lacking in terms of, like, the broad spectrum of human beings that exist. We then think that even in a system whereby you decide to randomize it, you're most likely going to get the bad people. Entropy in physics tells you that chaos is the most proximate response when it comes to randomization. We then think that in their world, you're most likely going to get the recycling of Tinubu, of Warrior, etc., and the rest of them. Third thing is on knowledge diet, and this is very, very basic, simple. Because the entire contention in their case is that they are going to get good representatives that are going to represent people, and they're going to lead to any viable change. We think that's something that's very lacking, because the extent that these guys know about their country is something that doesn't exist in that side of the world. Because individuals necessarily don't care to the extent that, obviously, the context of Nigeria, the apathy, and etc. Panel, we beg to oppose. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for the opposition. Now invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Go ahead.
Okay. Right. Okay, so basically, so I'm going to dedicate this speech to a better Nigeria, and also to everyone here, and also to OA Debate Club. I love you guys. So I'll begin the speech in 3, 2, 1. To a large extent, everyone here craves for a better Nigeria. We want to see a world where we are equally represented. But then secondly, everyone here craves for a world where, to a large extent, we matter every 4 years. Because the rhetoric that exists on their side is that there is no certainty that we matter. Because there is a rhetoric that is pushed that your votes don't count. Because people in power are basically going to, cycle out their opinion and rig elections. Like, that's a certainty. If you ask any average Nigerian what would be the problem in the next election, is rigging. Because after that 4 years, we're all going to scramble back in court and saying my vote was not counted well, basically. We think these are the problems we want to solve in this world, right? But then we're going to deal with what they identify. The first thing they identify is that corruption would exist in both worlds. But then this is a skill, this is a tipping point. They say our worlds allow for corruption because, to a large extent, the pool of selection will be limited, so you tend to still recycle people you choose. That's the extent of the analysis they gave, to a large extent, on corruption. We don't think it's true. We think the info slide already told you that the selection will be taken, people will be picked from the voters registry. So basically, voters registry is a compendium of most citizens in the country. So it's millions of people in that registry that will be picked. So they are not few people. So it also doesn't look like people putting in their names in this particular registry. The registry already exists because the registry is a representation of eligible citizens of those countries. So it means in symmetric level of population, it is not few, right? So it doesn't have the tendency to be recycled. But then the problem in their world is that people with power, to a large extent, have the capacity to keep recycling themselves in power. But then secondly, because political parties would always exist in their world, it means that people can still recycle, to a large extent, their hegemony in power through the hegemony of their political party. So you don't quite get change. So even if you change people in their world, hegemonic political parties still exist that will recycle this sort of thing. The next thing they talk about is on experience, right? We feel that that could be true. So I could be your next president tomorrow through this randomization process, to a large extent. But then notice the clarification my partner gives to you. The randomization process cut across every region, every age group, and every gender group. So it means that for every 50 youths that get into that office, we have every 50 experienced old people who could counterbalance their inexperience. But then secondly, we think, to a large extent, that power grants you the resources to be experienced, because to a large extent it means that you can employ the best hands to educate you on educational policies. It means that I can decide to ensure that professors are in my committee to ensure that I can make good policies. It means because of the power that my office gives me, I can decide to employ people in the medical field to make medical and medical decisions to ensure this particular thing. It means power grants me the ability to be able to choose people, to choose the capacity to which I can get information. Meaning power gives that level of symmetric information that can also counterbalance my inexperience. But then even if you don't buy this, we tell you that the process to a large extent would be symmetric to all age groups. So to every 50 youths you get the same 50 experienced people within this particular regard. So we think experience is counterbalanced within this sort of world. But then why, since power is the issue, the problem we want to solve is that to a large extent, people are not represented in power. That's the problem we want to solve, right? To a large extent, you see more Northerners in power than the rest of the regions. You see more men in power than the rest of the population. That's what we want to solve. We want to solve a world to a large extent of that level of representation. Why is it that women who are minorities already in Nigeria, some minority groups that you don't know, people like Ijo, like TV, like the Ibibios, will never be in power if you keep engaging in their world? Why is it that to a large extent those people cannot amass power and representation in their world? It's for these reasons. The first is because of the power imbalance from colonial heritage. This means the conscriptive colonial endowment of megacities that ensures that the revenue prioritization goes to megacities, that gives more revenue and more priority of funds to certain people over other. But then we also think is the volume of power concentration in places like the North. That also means to a large extent that power recycling would always come from them, because the vast majority of the regional representation are already much more represented in the North. But then secondly, because of the symmetric level of their population. This is the clarification here. The clarification is that we say that our picking would be symmetric. So it doesn't matter how large you are as the North, your selection process, you would also bring 50 people the same way the Igbo people are going to bring 50 people. So it's going to still be symmetric. This doesn't happen in their world because the North will keep based on their population, that based on the electoral birth of their population, would keep recycling themselves in power and keep maintaining that power. Why should you care about this? You should care about fairness. Care about representation to a large extent. You don't get that in their world because one, because of the lottery of birth, because of the symmetry of the environment, because of colonial heritage that prioritize more megacities than the other, they don't get this sort of thing. Because of the effect of the civil war that ensures that properties from the north are properties from the Igbo side after the civil war were moved to the north. This was intentional to weaken the Igbo people, and that's why you have limited Igbo people in the central, echelon of power that controls all these kind of policies. This is problematic in their world. And secondly, it also ensures that the rhetoric that Igbo people are more likely separatists hinder them from entering the central part of power. With the randomization process, to give them that fair chance to also more likely represent themselves in this regard. The last thing to say here is that why does all this matter? It matters because it creates that level of balance. It means that after every election, you will definitely matter because the representation from your side would get there. The same way the representation from every region would get there, so they matter. So it means that the TV person who will never even engage, who will never be a speaker in the House of Representatives would obviously be a speaker in this regard. So they matter. Why? Because they pay tax. Because secondly, they also ensure the growth of that particular nation. So they should matter every 4 years. They don't matter. They need to come and show us. They need to come and give us a comprehensive account as to how this will matter in a corrupt world in this particular regard. But then secondly, we think this breeds more level of nationalism and patriotism because if you matter, you more likely care about the country. Between the level of voters' apathy that they get in their world won't happen in our world in the instance to which all these sort of things matter to these people. The last thing we say here is that it also encourages some sense of self-belonging. The last thing I'm going to prove here is that to a large extent, Nigeria was created off of the basis of randomization process. So it means that certain ethnic groups do not consent to exist as Nigeria. The same way that you don't consent to be born and your child and your parents must care for you, the same way you must care for these minority groups because they can't be catered for in their world since they were born after that randomization process. We cater for them in our world based on the fact that we give them that level of share of power if they don't get in their world. We're very proud to submit.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister, for the speech. Now I invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Sorry, give me a second.
Yeah, sorry, just a second. Okay. I begin my speech at the countdown of 3, 2, 1. Wait, sorry. Phone is ringing. Okay. I begin my speech at the countdown of 3, 2, 1. Chairperson, two simple things in this speech. Firstly, engagement to opening government, and secondly, extensions of why we are much better from outside. Firstly, on engagement, the first thing you get from the outside is that they say Nigeria does not allow for representation because more women will not be in the system and impact become negative on the outside because women can't have trickle down impact because they don't have representations in those kinds of places. Two responses to this. Firstly, I'm going to constructively build a case as to how the alternative is something that is, or how the comparative is something that is continuously allowing for the inclusion of women into politics in Nigeria. But two, I'm going to show how their side is much more worse, given that you want to maximize these inclusion politics at the end of the day. But then secondly, they say, oh well, people will be moving to different political parties. That's to say, there's a problem with the hegemony of political parties that exists in the status quo, and there's leadership in isolation. The very much problem with this is that Peter Obi is a direct response to that particular claim, because the extent to which he was able to just mobilize individuals to come and vote for the Labour Party, this means that there is a chance that if competent individuals do emerge, Nigerians are more likely to vote for that kind of person and erode all those kind of affiliations they have to those political parties. Peter Obi directly responds to the entire case of political parties at the end of the day. But then, the first thing they say is that, oh well, the North will keep recycling power, which means you need to give more, you can't give more powers to Igbos and some other marginalized group within the purview of Nigeria. The very problem is this, is that one, they don't tell you what exactly is the problem with the North, except they want to be, of course, tribalist at the end of the day. But then two, I'm going to show you how on our side you're less likely going to get the outcomes that they talk about. Lastly, and very importantly, is on their clash and on the talk of corruption. I'm going to show you how the existence of corruption is multi-symmetric and how we're able to cater to that problem much more on our side. Let's move into constructive material, because most of my constructive arguments directly engage them at their best case scenario. The first thing I'm going to talk about is that this replacement process will prohibit the workability of this system. Why is this true? Two things. One, obviously, this is an ideal debate, so we have to consider this policy will pass. But then two, notice that the Nigerian system has adopted democracy for over half a decade, which means two things. One, we built certain structures, jobs, lives around this system. Certain organizations like INEC, ICJ, and other kinds of things that employ certain kinds of people. What then happens when this policy passes? One, displacement of people from certain jobs, which means two things. One, you get a larger population that is more employed. Two, you make people to lose the status that they've built for generations and passed down to generations. This essentially means three things. One, you get more unemployment from people. Two, you get increased crime rates. Why? Because the biggest incentive for people to commit criminal acts is because of the need to obtain resources. Given the fact that you deny them of their jobs, you are more likely to get criminals at the end of the day. But then thirdly, you are more likely to get a crippled economy. Why? Because the ripple effects of unemployment and crimes are the fact that they cripple your economy at the end of the day, because you have more people stealing, you have less people unemployed, it reduces the GDP and reduces the self-sufficiency of the country. Why is this important? One, is because it creates a system whereby the people hate the government, it hates the general system upon which the country operates in. But then secondly, you prevent antagonization between the people and the government, which makes it hard for the government to achieve simple things like the passing and implementation of policies due to that active antagonization that goes on between the government and the people at the end of the day, which means that the process makes it very hard for this thing to work, even in the best case scenario. This counteracts all the impact that you can get from their side. Second thing I'm then going to talk about is that in the best case scenario, it is not an equal representation on their side, it is an equal randomization. Why is this true? Justice tells you what constitutes representation on our side of the world. It talks about acceptance, that's to say, acceptance that must extend to the person. Two, I would then add that the decision must be made on an informed choice, given that this person was gotten into power not by an informed choice, but by a random system. We don't think these people made this decision on an informed choice, they just consented to the process, and we think this is necessary because the people need to be informed of the kinds of things that person is going to do when they're in power. This does not exist, meaning that it's not representation in itself. What does this mean? What's the third entailment? It means it must entail the voice of the people. Given that it does not extend to the person, it's not a direct voice of the people. What does this mean? This means that even if we consider the fact that it is fair, two things we can make a claim on. One, that it is unjust, as justice proves. But then secondly, democracy is fairness. And hence, given that you don't democracy is fairness to achieve people representation. Given that the fairness does not imply the representation of the people, even if you consider that it is fair, given that it's not a fairness to achieve representation, you cannot say it falls under democracy, it's anti-democratic in and of itself. Third thing I'm not going to run is that this system removes any incentive for the leaders to connect to the people. Why is this true? Look at the status quo. The incentive for people to campaign and get to political positions is for them to be able to connect to the people so that they can incentivize them to vote for them. The extent whereby this incentive no longer exists because people can just get to this position randomly, it means you get a disconnect between the people and any incentive they have to go and source out the problems that occur in certain minority spaces in the status quo. What are the impacts of this then? One, there's no connect or there's no information diet that these people have to operate on that connect to the people. But then two, the confliction of ideas, because look, you are more likely going to elect people or select people from different categories in the world. And this is taken on the best case scenario in Nigeria. And this is taken on the best case scenario where you say, oh, you have people of different age, which means you have different inclusion politics. No, because these people don't have a connect to the people. They are more likely going to make decisions based on their own choices, their own intuition. Meaning you are more likely to have a confliction of ideas because they don't directly represent what the people want in themselves. Meaning you're more likely going to get disagreements between an elderly person, a younger person, a person of this particular collective, a person of that particular collective, which means you get confliction of ideas at the end of the day. But then thirdly, these people have no incentive to care about the people. Why? Because they'll just be randomly elected, they'll be randomly dispersed out of that position at the end of the day. The flip is this: you get more incentive for people at least to go into those places to reflect problems that exist in those particular countries, which means you're more likely to get representation of the people, you're more likely to get the voice of the people, which have been implemented in Congress and those kinds of things. We think outside offers more representation. But the fourth thing I'm going to talk about is how lottocracy makes Nigeria to lose our connect on the international space. And this is very important because IR is how we thrive at the end of the day. Why is this true? Look at countries like US. Despite the fact they practice democracy, they are more likely to be antagonists to other forms of governmental systems. Democracy will make them not to make them to have this kind of disconnect with Nigeria. One, because it's not based on their own democratic principles. It's based on randomization, which is something that they have a very big problem about. But secondly, when you look at countries like Russia that even support different kinds of governmental systems like autocracy and those kinds of things that rebel against democracy, they are less likely even going to support you. Why? Because this is a random form of government that is not even based on communism, it's not based on socialism, it's based on randomization, which means you are less likely going to get any international support from any form of country because of this abhorrent and new kind of government you are trying to practice. Why is this important? Two reasons. One, you lose your influence and relevance in international space because countries have less likely of an incentive to want to trade with you or to want to do anything with you or to want to associate with you. But then two, when you have countries like US that are more likely to mobilize other people that they have influence over, you're less likely going to get any kinds of return from these kinds of people, which means on the international space you lose out. Why is this very important for Nigeria? One, we don't have refineries, which means we need to export those kind of crude and those kinds of products to process it to bring it back to our country. Given that you no longer have this kind of relationship or you have a negative trade agreement with these kinds of people, which means you're more likely going to suffer. You're not going to reach your raw materials, you can't process them, and we're going to die in like 2-3 years, which means our impact is much more proximate than all the impacts you talk about. Last thing, very importantly, why is the comparative better? In as much as it's not, it is worse. In as much as it's bad, it's still comparatively better. Fourth thing is one, equality progression is something that's existing in status quo, which means you are getting more inclusion politics in that, of women into the Congress and those kinds of things. That is why you are seeing it is much more better than it was in the past. It's much more going to get better because the status quo is liberal and it's it allows for the inclusion of women. But then two, you have empirical evidence of women that are performing in different spaces of the world and different spaces of Nigeria. Okonjo-Iweala, for example, she's an incentive for women to actually mobilize and push for them to go into these kinds of spaces, which means women are getting more included. But then thirdly, even if we continue to push for reforms, literally, I give it maximum 2 years, we're going to have a revolution. We might actually reach the tipping point whereby the government is too bad and we are tired of this and are more likely to change the system, continue these reforms, education and every kind of thing that we need to grow our economy. That's the only way we can ensure that, yes, we can avoid all the harms they talk about and self-sustain as a country. We're very proud to win this final.
Going on to the second half, now invite the member of the government to attend to us. Right now, member of government.
Yeah. Okay. Hi guys, this is my first open finals. I'm so happy to be here. I want to dedicate this speech to the best vice chancellor in the world, Professor Hyacinth Choku. He spent a lot of money to get us here, and we're not going to disappoint you. But shout out to my coaches, the Veritas University Debate Society, to my amazing partner, Blessing. Thank you. I'll give you your first win today. All right. So I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Since Nigeria's independence, power has been domiciled within certain classes of people. At the highest federal level, it has been restricted to old men, particularly from a certain region. When you come down to individual regions where representation is more prominent, it has still been reserved for one gender, one age group. We think it's time for a change. I'm going to prove 3 things in my speech. The first is why randomness is actually going to guarantee better outcomes. But then secondly, why giving access to this group of people which have been locked out from these echelons of power is going to be very, very important. But then thirdly, even in the worst case scenario, why lottocracy is still going to produce marginal better results. The first thing here is on randomness. And this is totally different from what opening says because they say that there's going to be a balance of people. So 50% youth in power, 50% old people in power. That's untrue. With every lottery, there are chances and odds depending on the data set you pick from, right? So statistically, more than half of Nigeria's population is youth. They are youth, right? But then secondly, there are also statistically more women in Nigeria. I think the margin is slight, but it's true. Compared to status quo, there's a far higher guarantee that whoever is going to be president in Nigeria is going to be a man. Whoever is going to be the governor is going to be a man, an old man. On our side of the house, that guarantee is not static. We think we have a higher a higher chance of getting either a woman or somebody that is young. However, we don't think that is guaranteed that on all like stratas of power or like on the local government, governor, all of that, every single person there is going to be a youth or is going to be a woman. But the key thing to note here is based on statistics, based on how randomness works, it favors our case. But then secondly, right, we think that generally we prefer to gamble with these odds. So I'll show you why, first of all, having youths or having more women in power is going to be more important. The first thing here is that Gen Z, Gen Z generation and millennials in Nigeria have a very unique characterization. We've all heard stories about how Nigeria was far better in the past. Things like pure water was 5 naira, a trip from Lagos to Abuja was 30K, less than minimum wage. My VC spent 500,000 naira to bring us here to Ilorin. Because of this unique struggle that our demography has faced, it is less likely that we are going to be as heartless and cruel as the current group of people who currently hold power and have held power for the past 64 years in Nigeria. We think that it's very cruel for you as a person to watch terrorists ravage a country while you travel the world, you buy yourself cars and all of this type of things. But then secondly, right, when these youths or women get into power, we think that there are very unique mechanisms to call them out that do not exist on their side of the house. So worst case scenario, right, to get somebody that's not so great into power, here's why call out works better on our side of the house. The first thing here is that as a youth, generally, your parents are probably still alive. So it means that there are certain things that they have like influence over in your life. So it then means that you're probably not going to take silly decisions when you're working or when you're in power. But then secondly, we are the most active demography on social media. We care about things like fame, looking good, the optics of all of it. It is very unlikely that somebody who is 20 or 30 years old that's in power is going to take some silly drastic decisions and ruin the economy and things like that. Compare this case with like Desmond Elliott and how people have called him out severally on social media for all the bad and horrible things he has done and how he apologized and all of that. We think on our side of the house, there's a higher level of social cohesion to ensure that whoever gets into power is able to properly function with their duties and all of that. But then secondly, it's unlikely that the average Nigerian youth is going to be willing to damn all these consequences and just go into power and make everything bad the way they say. The problem with opposition in today's debate is that majority of their cases still, like majority of the systems they talk about how they are going to be bad on our side of the house still exist, right? So they say that, oh, there's not going to be an INEC, there's not going to be a whole lot of functions and things are just going to fall apart. We don't think that that's true. Just because you're replacing the method of an electoral system doesn't mean that the foundation behind it crashes and falls, even if it does think that we have fiat to do that, right? But then secondly, right, even if the people that get into power on our side of the house are going to be bad, we don't think that it's going to be on the same scale as what we have in status quo. Because note, majority of these politicians who have held power for the longest amount of time do not necessarily have any incentive to change. They need to defend why we have to stay stuck in status quo when there's no incentive for call out, there's no uniqueness to anything that they say. But then thirdly, right, for all the older people that will probably get into power by this means of randomness, we still think that there's a balance, right? So when these other younger people come into power, there's most likely going to be a balance. So even if they want to argue, oh, there's no experience and all of that, we think we can get that. But then secondly, we don't think that people who lead or like all these committees that exist on government structures and all of that are automatically going to disappear because you've changed the electoral system that gets people into power. We still think that people are able to consult with experts within fields if they don't know how to rule and all of that. But then let's talk about women rights. We think that Nigeria is one of the worst countries in terms of rating women's health, well-being, and the overall way they are treated. We have one of the highest mortality rates across countries. Very harmful stereotypes are still perpetuated within status quo, things like domestic violence, rape, etc. And generally, women are locked out of echelons of power for the longest amount of time, right? We think that it is very likely that whichever woman on our side of the house gets into power is going to be very proximate to all these issues I've talked about, because she has most likely experienced them in one way or another. This is very important because in status quo, you get very little representation for women, but more importantly, you don't get any form of benefits for most women across the country. So things like getting access to education, things like things that women generally just need, right? We think it is very important for women to get into these spaces of power and be able to advocate for themselves uniquely. This is something that you don't get on their side of the house. We think that majority of what they argue about how democracy is going to be removed and representation is not going to exist is untrue, because on our side of the house we literally still have majority of what they have. So men can still get into power, experienced people can still get into power. The reason why we are winning uniquely from our side is that we show you why it is important for a new demography of people to be included into the echelons of power in Nigeria. We show you exactly why that is going to be helpful in making things better. We don't think that our case is predicated on assumptions. I've shown you the statistics. But then they talk about a couple of things, right, from open opposition. The first thing they say is that Nigeria is going to lose international relations and all of that. I don't think that diplomatic relations are built on the system of government you use. It's most likely a trade, right? So whatever you're getting from somebody, as long as the person can get something similar from you, those diplomatic relations are still going to exist. But then secondly, right, we think that majority of their case is still symmetric. We're very proud to win from closing goal.
Thank you very much, member of government, right member of opposition, extend the case to all the opposition side.
So I'm audible, yeah? So before I begin my speech, shout out. Some very important people needed to be shouted out. First of all, mascot, I fucking love you. Man. Thank you so much for everything. FUTO Debate Union, everyone in FUTO, Kela, my first coach, evidently. um, my partner, amazing, very amazing. God Almighty, and obviously my brother. I love you. Thank you so much for everything you do. Okay. So starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The people are the problem, or the people are the structure. Collins 2024. Understand one thing. You have to have two questions in your mind when you're hearing my speech. What is going to happen to the people in power when this policy is going to be effected and changed? That is the corrupt individuals, the Tinubus, the BTOBs, and all henceforth. Understand two things. One, that these individuals in power already exist in power, have access, a certain level of access that the normal individual doesn't have. That means they know the Femi Otedolas, the Tony Elumelus, all these things. Secondly, they have access to minority group leaders. That means they have access to traditional rulers, all those people who are active in making decisions. But the third thing, they have access to kingmakers who we know in Nigeria exist. Things like oil moguls, one man in the north who owns an oil well in Port Harcourt. All these things, which makes governance more easier to effect. What it means is that at the end of the day, they have a certain level of access and power that it cannot be taken away from them. Why is this then important? We have to make a concession that these individuals or this random selection is going to be very speculative, because these individuals, even if they get into power, they lack the knowledge, which opening already tells you. They lack the substantial amount of knowledge to effect any change. But secondly, they lack these intricate accesses that the Tinubus, the P2Bs have in effecting change. What the argumentation here is that this lottocracy is going to recycle corruption. How? Because understand, when these individuals are going to come into power and want to place their holding and effect change, they still have to answer to individuals in status quo. What it means is that the Apobios of the time, the P2Bs of the time, are going to lobby in some form of way to try to gain acceptance or to try to gain membership within their government. What it means at the end of the day is, because these individuals are bound to fail. They lack the knowledge, they lack the access, they lack the intricate things needed to effect change in status quo. What it means, you're going to get situations like godfatherism, where these individuals are going to fall back to these people who have the ability to effect change in status quo.
What it means is that any form of change is not going to be practical. Our opening tells you that you cannot consistently get a level of, good change. We tell you that is bullshit, because at the end of the day, these individuals are going to have a level of dependence on people who can actually help them effect change. That's the first argumentation. But the second thing is to say the concept of accountability. Understand that a person who, like, what's this analogy? That the person who, a Jehovah Witness blames nobody because they know that they are the ones that took the decisions not to take blood or whatsoever. So when they die, they have no, like, when people or their family members die, they have no one to blame at the end of the day. Understand that accountability on the people is premised on the fact that you took decisions in taking those actions or in voting in your leaders. What it means is that if you give these individuals, or these individuals in status quo, citizens don't necessarily have a sense of, like, ownership, or do not necessarily make decisions, they are less likely to be accountable to the actions that happen on the government. What it means to is on the government part, because individuals in government who we are not necessarily didn't necessarily value or poorly for these actions, or didn't poorly for these problems, are less likely to be accountable to the individuals. What it means at the end of the day, is that as an impact, is that there's a certain level of apathy that's going to exist, because individuals know that they didn't necessarily contribute to the actions that exist in status quo. At the end of the day, you're going to get a very problematic system in and of itself. Before I continue, take. That is untrue, because if you understand the history of coalitions, or the concept of loyalties, their loyalties are tied to these individuals who already exist in power. Understand that these people who already exist in power have a certain level of respect from the people, have a certain level of know-how that the people have, like, or have to themselves. That means in their communities or in the states, they have people who are very, like, drawn to them, and who necessarily, like, understand them, respect them, have a certain of vile to them, or all those type of things. So you're less likely to get a situation where these individuals are going to try to lobby to these people, but you're more likely to get a situation where these people are going to lobby for the same power, and therefore repeat the cycle of corruption in itself. But the third thing to say is on the concept of alternatives. We think that our opening doesn't necessarily do a consensual word in trying to paint what the world or status quo looks like. We think that there's a problem of inclusion that exists in status quo. We think it's very problematic. We think the nature of the way people are being
registry is done, they look for another person who indicates interest, or the second person in line who was probably picked before that new person is then given the power. But then even if we force a person to do something, we think that that is not necessarily a bad thing because of the nature of benefits that exist. It's simple. If I was forced to be a president of my debate union, I do not want to be a president. But because I know that I have much benefits, like things to, I can actively travel around the world. I can engage in so many debate tournaments across Nigeria, across Africa, across the world. I can actively always have money, the level of salaries, the level of things that I'm being paid. It gives me more incentive to want to be a part of this thing. So even if I am forced to become a president or become a leader in status quo, what that then looks like is that there is more incentive for these people to be a part of those things. First of all, because there's these things like committees, and you can always you do not rule in isolation, so you can have access to various level of people that can actually provide solutions for you. But then secondly, based upon the fact that you get things like very, very high recognition status, you're able to engage with people from all over the world who actually have rights to various international connections and all of that. And then secondly, nature of salaries and all those things that you get, we think that there's still a very, very, very high incentive for you to actually stay in these things, accept these benefits, do your work that you have been called to do based off on those nature of lottery existences. But then what do we basically tell you in today's debate, right? And then how exactly do we win? We tell you that based off on the nature of things that have currently happened in status quo, a new demographic or various demographics that have been disadvantaged or neglected for the longest period of time should actually be included. Their biggest case on corruption does not work in today's debate, right? We tell you how, even on nature of randomization, how there is still a better chance for randomization to succeed on this level of debate, because we're still able to get access to so many other things. The only thing that exists is the level of how we choose a leader. Every other better political systems will still exist on our own side of the house. Give Veritas University the truth.
Thank you very much. So, with final speaker of the show, Ms. Rafa.
I'll take POIs at 5 minutes. Yeah, don't badger, please just raise up your hand. Don't vocalize. Yeah. And okay, shout out. Before I start, sorry, I'd like to thank God Almighty. This is my first open and my first break officially. So thank God. I'd like to thank my parents, to my mom, to my dad, to my siblings. Thank you so much for your support and prayers. I'd like to officially thank my union, FUTO Debating Union, for my first coach mascot, to Kela, to Evelyn, to Gemma, to Favor, to Temi, to Justice, to that guy, to Uzube, to Xavier, to everybody. Thank you for always inspiring me. Thank you to other unions too for also inspiring me, because when I see you guys win, I also want to win as well. So thank you very much. And to my amazing partner, thank you very much for bringing me this far. God bless you. So, PI 15 minutes, please don't vocalize. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. This house would replace Nigerian electoral system with a lottocracy. This is a policy motion, which means we must mechanize a procedure to which we take, and which we feel OG has already done well in showing us a procedure which closing did not show explicitly. What we agree to in this debate is that one, corruption exists in both worlds, meaning that corruption exists in democracy or lottocracy, however they want to paint it. But I'll be moving on to giving you responses to all their cases as a we speak and showing you why we are better in this debate. The first thing we get from OG is that they want representation at every cost. They do not show us how it will be it will cause a problem, with ensuring that people that are properly eligible would be in place at the end of the day. They tell you that it's possible for you to bring in everybody and bring in representation. We have over 400 ethnic groups in Nigeria. How would you ensure that 400 ethnic groups would have leadership or a position to rule in a country like Nigeria that is also a third world country at the first place? Secondly, there is no base to how they will pick these people to ensure that, if you are picking 400 people from 400 tribes, it means you must pick 400 men and women from 400 tribes. This shows you the problem that comes with packing so many people at the end of the day. What would this lead to? This will lead to chaos in representation, because you have to pick somebody from a part, pick a woman, pick an age problem, and ensure that they are eligible for this position at the end of the day. The second thing that OG tells you that will bring them food to this debate is that impeachment can occur. In a third world country like Nigeria, why is impeachment a problem? Because one, there's less economic growth. Two, there's chaos with citizens when political stability is something that is very important for a country to go. And third, there's forces in politics. Other countries will not want to associate with you if you're always having impeachment because, this woman will put today failed, this young boy will put today failed, and all those kind of things. Because something that OG tells you in their debate at the end of the day, and this will bring them for at the end of the day. This brings about low representation, and they will not be able to collaborate with other countries. That's like my opening told you at the end of the day. The third thing they tell you is that political conflict will be reduced in their country. We tell you that when people suffer under the rule of a bad governance, because this is something that is inevitable, OG will resort to impeachment, which we have shown is wrong in this debate. And even if there's no impeachment, we feel there will be agitation of citizens, just like my partner already told you already at the first place. People will not want to bear the suffering of people that did not put to the position at the end of the day. Why we did not go and violently remove fuel subsidy? It's because people voted for him at the end of the day. When you just stay in government and somebody speak by organization, you influence public agitation at the end of the day. The second thing that it overall affect the country with this agitation and political conflict at the end of the day. 5 minutes, check your time. What we get from DPM is that equal representation, without showing us how this election will properly bring about equal representation at the end of the day. The first thing they say is power grants people best-hand experience. They want to use Nigeria as a playing ground for people to gain experience to rule at the end of the day. This is a problem because you just want to say, because youth have never ruled or women have never ruled, let us put them in power so that they can get experience. Nigeria is a third world country that prioritizes growth and economic development. At the end of the day, how would this impeachment or any problem that comes with test running the electoral process to be a benefit to Nigeria at the end of the day? This is something that did not show us, because irrespective of their capacity, there's a tendency for them to fail, and this is very problematic in Nigeria at the end of the day, because the office of the president has ripple effects in things that affect the country, as we know at the end of the day. The third thing they tell you about policy of inclusivity, where you have 50 Igbos, 50 TVs, 50 Yoruba, 50 Hausa. We already show that why there is a problem, and that will be inefficient, waste of time, and slow economic growth at the end of the day. Apart from showing that something like regional political parties will be something that will bring about proper representation at the end of the day to bring people to be properly represented. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. at the end of the day. Moving on, they said that Nigeria thrived begotten of randomization. Let's tell you, most African countries existed on randomization. White men just came, randomizedly cut out some area and called it a country. This is a very silly case and should not fly from their bench. What do we get from government case? The first thing they tell you is that the youth and women are the most disadvantaged. They have no rights, no access to rights and policies at the end of the day. This is problematic. One, because this already shows you that women and youth lack proper education to rule at the end of the day. If you say that they are disadvantaged, how do you prove their efficiency in that office at the end of the day? Because this already showed you that they don't have the ability to be able to succeed well. We see that most fraudsters are who? Youth. Most prostitutes are who? Women. This disadvantaged group are in worse positions in the country. And how do you expect them to rule at the end of the day? Because, and the second thing to talk about is about the reduced morale that exists. Most youth don't care about ruling. If you tell you that you will become president, they will say, I will embezzle all the money. Because they don't even care about it at the end of the day. These women already lose the incentive to even rule in the first place. When they even talk about salary incentive, why is this flawed? Because you incentivize people to rule on greed, on basis of greed, or to self-actualize against the country at the end of the day. Government will also have a case. Moving on to the next thing they talk about is that there is less incentive for people to be corrupt. We show you why this is flawed. Because these women have been marginalized. When they're marginalized and you put them to rule, they want to extract the 100% best of this country, and they already have an incentive to be corrupt. Because this means that one, they don't have experience as they are disadvantaged at the end of the day, and secondly, my partner showed you why they always want to seek advice from other people, which will lead to godfatherism at the end of the day. The best thing we get from them is that when these youth commit a crime or commit something that is wrong, they will apologize. In Nigeria, you cause a national disaster and you tell them to come and apologize to change the situation. Government whip is flawed. They tell you that people will have the incentive to come and apologize and change the state of Nigeria. You remove fresh subsidy and you will come and say, I apologize for bread is more expensive, petrol is more expensive. This is very flawed collab mechanism. But the government repent because there's no collab mechanism. These people since they rule at the end of the day. They said that people will indicate interest. We show you why one, they might not be able to indicate interest because they are not properly educated in that field at the end of the day. And second thing, when they say there is opt-out mechanism, which means that if they even put in that position, you can decide that, oh, I don't want to rule again. This is flawed because we already affect Nigeria to cause low growth or poor economic development at the end of the day as a third world country. Is it that women would indicate interest? Let's tell you something that patriarchy has eaten so deep into Nigeria that many women would never want to do. They'll say, see, I want to be Odogu wife. Exactly. That's what they will tell you. I want to be like Chalubu. They don't want shares. They don't want anything that will stress in their life. And they tell people have incentives to come and rule at the end of the day. What else do you got from them? They tell you that this randomization will bring youth that are marginalized. We tell you that most fraudsters are youth, most prostitutes are women at the end of the day. Poverty exists that limit these people. Cost of education is so high. Most youth don't go to school because you can afford it. Don't even everybody can afford it in Nigeria. That is the third world country. At the end of the day, you talk about there's a harmful stereotype of women. We said that exists in Nigeria, and that already shows you an incentive for them not to rule at the end of the day. The social media color mechanism is something that is flawed because a country cannot need an apology from a government when they make a very drastic decision that will affect their life at the end of this. With this, we show you why extensively a policy should be to develop democracy and not to induce lottocracy. Well,